Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 20, page 983. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Well, I said last week that last week's episode was a bit like an episode of the old TV programme Blind Date. We had a quick reminder last week of the evidence for who Jesus is before make your mind up time about Jesus. But this week I want to change the illustration a little bit. This week I want us to think of it more as the game of Guess Who. Has anyone played this game, Guess Who? Come on, own up. Who's played the game of Guess Who? Let me explain how it works. I've got a set here. Actually, this isn't Guess Who. It's a cheap knockoff imitation. But it serves the purpose just as well. So each player has a rack of, I think it's 24 faces and names. And then they take a card that their opponent has to guess which person is on the card. And as you guess, do they wear glasses? Have they got fair hair? Is it a man or a woman? All those sorts of things. You pop down the ones that it can't be until you're left with the one that it must be. And then you say, is it Bruce in this case? Okay, this is the Australian version. Is it Bruce? Well, through Matthew's Gospel so far, the disciples have been playing a game of Guess Who. They've gone around picking up the bits of evidence as to who Jesus is. Not in this case, whether he's got fair hair or dark hair or whether he's wearing glasses or not. But they've looked at the things that he did and said, the pieces of evidence as to who he is. And today we come to the climax of the whole of the first half of Matthew's Gospel. It's that point in Guess Who, where you've asked all the questions and you have to say what conclusions you've come to. It's make your mind up time. And for Simon Peter, when he's put on the spot and asked, "Guess who?" he says, "You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God." It's obvious to everyone that Jesus is someone special. I just looked down on the first couple of verses. It says, when Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." Everyone knows Jesus is someone special. The only question is, who exactly is he? He does many public miracles that no one can deny. Some people try saying that the power he gets comes from the devil. But they can't deny that the miracles are happening. Even his political rival, King Herod, couldn't deny his power. Herod and some others thought that he was John the Baptist come back to life. Others thought he was the prophet Elijah or another of the great prophets of the Old Testament. His disciples, they had seen more evidence than anyone else. And they knew, they realised who he was. They had already been waking up to who he was. After he walked on water, they said, "Truly you're the Son of God." But that was still a stepping stone in their understanding. It's not until now that he's publicly, confidently identified as the Messiah. All God's people, the Jews, have been waiting for the Messiah. It's Hebrew for anointed one. The Greek for anointed one, for Messiah, is Christ. Christ and Messiah, they mean exactly the same thing. One's Hebrew, the other's Greek. And the Messiah, the Christ, was the one who was going to come to rescue his people. He would be more than a prophet. They were expecting that he was going to be a powerful ruler who would overthrow the oppressive rule of foreigners, the Roman Empire, and he would restore Israel as an independent and powerful state, as it had been many years earlier, 1,000 years earlier, under David and Solomon. If they'd read their Old Testament more carefully, they'd have realised that he was much, much more than that. And here, for the first time, as all the alternatives are eliminated, Peter is finally put on the spot. What about you, Jesus asked. Who do you say I am? And Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That's the inescapable conclusion of all that God has been showing through Jesus, through the whole of the first half of Matthew's Gospel. To deny it is like playing a game of Guess Who and flipping down all the other characters and then still refusing to say the only person that still popped up, the only person he could possibly be. And yet, as we saw last week, that's exactly what some people try to do. Cynical people try to wriggle out of the overwhelming evidence for who Jesus is. Why do they do it? Do you remember what we said last week? It's not because they're rational or scientific. No, all the evidence points in one direction only. No, it's because they don't want someone to hold them morally accountable. They don't want Jesus to be the Messiah, because they love being rulers of their own lives too much. Well, I need to ask you Jesus' question. I warned you last week, didn't I? That it's make your mind up time. What about you? Who do you say he is? I can't go round and ask each of you individually, but there will be a day when you come face to face with Jesus Christ. And he will ask you what you made of him when you had the opportunity. It will be too late to change your minds then. He'll say to you, you heard all about me. I know you used to go to church. Maybe you did some courses. Maybe you read some books. Maybe you had long conversations with your friends. And what conclusion did you come to? That won't be the time for saying, oh, I always said I wanted more evidence. I was never totally sure, so I held back. I was afraid of what other people would say. If I'm honest, I just liked running my own life too much. Or will you respond, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God? That's what Kerry's done this morning. Maybe you're ready to do that for the first time today. Are you ready to say, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God? At the end of the sermon in a few minutes, I'll lead us in a prayer, and it'll be your opportunity to say what you make of Jesus Christ. Maybe for the first time ever. But that's just the beginning of the Christian life. You see, when you play Guess Who, it doesn't normally change your life. You don't leave a changed person. You don't tend to have a kind of existential change of fundamental identity from playing a game of Guess Who. But when you come to Jesus Christ, it's different. If you profess Jesus as the Messiah, but then you merrily carry on living your life just the same, then you've missed the point. You haven't understood what it means for him to be the Christ. Coming to Jesus means that there's a new ruler in your life. Someone who brings every aspect of your life under his generous care. It changes everything about your outlook on life, your relationships, your money, your time, the company you keep maybe. Jesus talks about it as being born again, starting a new life as a member of a new family, a new father and new brothers and sisters. We've seen the symbol of it this morning, of baptism. But in this particular Bible passage, Jesus explains that great transformation for Simon Peter in a different way. Just as Peter has identified Jesus, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God, so now Jesus gives Peter a new identity and role. He says, you are Peter, son of Jonah. Look down again at verse 17. Verse 16, Simon Peter said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Verse 17, Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. For this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. This is the climax of the whole of the first half of Matthew's Gospel. There's a play on words in what Jesus says. You can see from the footnote. I know we've got a few people called Peter here this morning. What does Peter mean? The rock. Yeah, thank you, Rocky. Peter means the rock. So Jesus is saying, you are Peter, the rock, and on this rock, Peter, I will build my church. It's the reason why we've got certain ideas today about St. Peter at the pearly gates deciding who's going to get into heaven. You must have seen those pictures, cartoons, St. Peter at the pearly gates. This is where it comes from. And do you know, the shock is that Peter is so ordinary. Are you surprised by that? Who would you expect the church to be built on? Who was it who expected themselves to be those who were doing the binding and the loosing at this time? It was the religious authorities. The Pharisees and Sadducees, who we saw last week, came up from Jerusalem to test Jesus. They were the ones who expected to be in charge of the church, not an uncouth fisherman from Galilee. But the contrast is clear. Matthew tells us that after Jesus left the Pharisees and Sadducees and went away, he went up to Caesarea Philippi. This is the furthest he gets from Jerusalem in the whole of Matthew's Gospel, deep into Gentile territory. And this is where Jesus says, on this rock I will build my church, not on any other rock. Why is Peter marked out in this particular way? Simply, it seems, because he has acknowledged Jesus as the Messiah. An ordinary man who recognizes Jesus as the Messiah. He's presented all the way through as the first disciple. He's the one who was first called by Jesus at the Sea of Galilee back in chapter 4. Matthew says explicitly that he's first in chapter 10 when he lists the 12 disciples. And he's also called the son of Jonah in our passage. I think that's because, first of all, he's going to believe the sign of Jonah. That is the death and resurrection of Jesus. But more than that, like Jonah, he's going to take God's message to religious outsiders. Jonah was sent by God to be a prophet to the Gentiles in a wicked city far from Jerusalem called Nineveh. And now Jesus takes Peter to a Gentile city far from Jerusalem to say that on him he will build his church. And later on in the book of Acts, we see that Peter is presented as a second Jonah in bringing the gospel to Gentiles, religious outsiders, for the first time. So Peter is the first disciple. In a sense, he's the foundational disciple, especially because he's the one who, like Jonah, brings religious outsiders into an ethnically mixed church. But whilst Peter is the first and the foundational disciple, actually he's also the typical disciple. Peter's given this extraordinary responsibility in verse 19 of binding and loosing the things on earth to match the things in heaven. But if you flip on one page to chapter 18, verse 18, you'll see that responsibility is going to be shared with others in church life. 18, verse 18, Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And here Jesus is talking to his disciples generally. The you there is plural. Jesus' disciples generally will share the responsibility of binding and loosing. We'll think more when we come to chapter 18 about what exactly that binding and loosing involves. In the book of Acts, as we've said, Peter is the first to bring the gospel to Gentiles, but he's by no means the last. So Peter might be the first disciple, but he's by no means the last. He's the typical disciple that all other disciples are modelled on. So where will we find Peter's successors today? The Roman Catholic Church would tell us that Peter was the first pope, and therefore Pope Francis is the successor to Peter today. But I think that misses the point entirely. The Pope is more like a Pharisee and Sadducee kind of figure in the church today. Peter is a simple, humble fisherman who acknowledges Jesus as the Messiah. And he takes his message out to anyone and everyone. Where will we find people like that today? Here. It's Kerry, isn't it? And every ordinary believer like her. Is every one of us who have acknowledged that Jesus is the Christ. We are the people that Jesus is building into his church. The church of the Old Testament became the temple system that was ruled by a religious elite. It thrived on exclusivity and empty rituals. But Jesus says to Peter, "On this rock I will build my church." He's building a new gathering of God's people, a church of all nations and backgrounds and types. And it's a church that's self-propagating. As people become disciples, they make new disciples. We don't need to look for popes and bishops to be successors of Peter. We don't need to look either for super apostles, big name speakers or charismatic evangelists. No, the Church of Jesus Christ is built on ordinary people. Like Peter. Like Kerry. Like Derek. Like Rona. Like Saley. Like Eddie. Like you and me, if we're Christian people. Ordinary people who have just one thing going for us. We've realised that Jesus is the Messiah, and we're not afraid to say so. That's the fundamental change of identity when you come to Christ. Becoming a Christian isn't about a kind of grudging intellectual kind of assent to the idea that Jesus is Messiah. It's about coming under the rule of a new king. such that he transforms our identity and our purpose. And so when we close in a moment, I want us to think about what it means to be a successor to Peter, what it means to follow in his footsteps as the typical disciple, what it means to be a disciple who makes disciples, and what opportunities we have to be involved in that work. Well, maybe you feel daunted by that. It is quite daunting. I hope you do. It's not something we can do by our own strength. But there's comfort, isn't there, in that statement of Jesus's, "On this rock I will build my church." Remember, it's on this rock, not the rock of the Pharisees and Sadducees. It's his church, not the old temple system that's corrupted and about to be destroyed. And here's the comfort for us. He says, "I will build my church." It's built on ordinary believers like you and me. But he's doing something extraordinary through us. Let's take a few moments to reflect. Just think about what you make of Jesus Christ. It might be that you need to acknowledge him as the Messiah for the very first time. But if you've done that, have you grasped the profound change of identity that comes with that? Our new role as those on whom Jesus is building his church. What role can you play in that? Just a minute or two of quiet. I'm going to lead us in prayer now. And I'll pause after each line so that if you're able to, if you're ready to, you can just echo each line silently in your heart. Let's pray. Jesus, I'm sorry that I've wanted to rule my own life my way. I acknowledge now that you are the Messiah, my ruler and rescuer. Please teach me what it means to be your disciple. Please build your church on me, your disciple. Whatever that demands of me, give me your strength to do it. Amen.